The chamber was built to make visitors feel small. That was the point of it. The Galactic Conclave's main hall rose 400 meters from floor to ceiling, its walls carved from the black stone of a dead moon, its galleries packed with delegates from 81 species. The acoustics were engineered so that every sound, every whisper, every shifting chair, every exhaled breath traveled upward and dissolved into the dark. It made the space feel infinite. It made the person standing at the center of it feel like a speck. Delegate Mara Vasquez stood at the center of it. She was not a tall woman. She was not a frightening woman. She wore a plain gray suit that had been pressed that morning in a budget hotel 2 kilometers from the Conclave's main complex because Earth's diplomatic allowance didn't cover the attached residences. Her dark hair was pinned back. Her hands rested on the podium in front of her. Still, not gripping, just resting. Around her, in tiered galleries that curved like the inside of a shell, 81 delegations waited. The Archon of the Conclave, Adreth, tall and silver-scaled, with 4 eyes that moved independently, looked down from the central elevated platform and said the words he had prepared for this moment. He had practiced them. They were meant to land with weight. The Galactic Conclave, in unified session, finds the nation-state of Earth to be in sustained violation of trade accords, diplomatic conduct standards, and cooperative infrastructure agreements. The remedy, carried by vote of 78 member states, with 3 abstentions, is formal banishment. Effective immediately, Earth is stripped of all registered hyperspace lane access, all communication relay rights, all trade route recognition, and all diplomatic standing within this body. He paused. He let it sit. Earth is removed from the community of civilized space. The chamber was quiet. Not the respectful kind. The satisfied kind. Mara Vasquez did not move, did not flinch, did not look up at the Archon with anger or down at her notes with shame. She looked straight ahead at the middle distance, at nothing, the way a person looks when they are listening to something no one else in the room can hear. The Archon had expected tears. Some delegates always cried. He had expected rage. Human delegates had a reputation for it. He had, in his quieter moments of preparation, even expected her to walk out before the sentence was finished. A gesture of defiance that would have played well for the galleries and meant nothing. He had not expected this. Whatever this was, he cleared his throat. Delegate Vasquez, the session is concluded. Earth's diplomatic credentials are hereby. I'd like 60 seconds. Her voice was flat. Conversational. Like she was asking for a glass of water. The chamber stirred. Delegates leaned toward each other. The Keth ambassador, 6 rows up on the left gallery, made a sound that in his species meant something close to amusement. The Archon looked at her for a long moment. He was a reasonable being. He was also a being who had just won completely, and the confidence of total victory makes reasonable beings generous in small things. 60 seconds, he said. She did not check notes, did not look around the room, did not build to anything. The clock started 3 years ago, she said. Not today. Then she picked up the single folder from the podium, turned, and walked out of the chamber. No hesitation, no backward glance. Her footsteps on the stone floor traveled up into the dark ceiling and dissolved. The chamber sat with it for a moment. Then the Keth ambassador made a different sound, the one that meant he thought the whole thing was sad. Several other delegations began the formal business of departure, filing out, consulting aides, moving on to the next item on a very full political calendar. The banishment of Earth was a footnote, a necessary correction, something to be recorded and forgotten. In the 7th gallery, the Vale delegation did not move. There were 4 of them. The Vile were old, not old the way individuals get old, but old the way a species gets old, the kind of old that accumulates in the eyes and makes every gesture deliberate. Their lead delegate, a narrow-framed being named Sereth of the 7th Fold, had not taken his eyes off Vasquez from the moment she entered. He had watched her through the entire session. He had watched the stillness of her, the patience of it. He had seen patience before. He had seen it in species that were resigned, species that had given up and were waiting for the humiliation to end. This was not that kind of patience. He turned to the junior member of his delegation and said, very quietly, in the Viel's own tongue, "Pull every Earth shipping manifest from the last 10 years. All of them. Tonight." The junior delegate looked at him. "The session is over. Earth has been..." "Tonight," Sereth said. He looked at the empty space where Vasquez had been standing. The clock started 3 years ago. He had been in this chamber for 40 years. He had heard 10,000 speeches, 1,000 acts of defiance, 100 desperate last words from delegations losing everything. He had learned to hear the difference between a person saying something and a person reporting something. Vasquez had been reporting. Outside the conclave complex, in the wide gray plaza that stretched between the building's main entrance and the transit hub, Mara Vasquez walked at the same pace she always walked. Her aide, a young man named Torres, who had been with her for 3 years and had learned not to ask questions at moments like this, fell into step beside her without a word. They walked half the length of the plaza before Torres spoke. "They're going to think you lost your mind," he said, "or that you were bluffing." "Good," she said. "Were you?" She didn't answer immediately. Above them, the conclave's towers caught the last light of the system's star and threw long shadows across the plaza stones. "Pull up the relay station status when we get back to the hotel," she said. "I want current numbers from all 14 sites." Torres tapped his wrist communicator. "You really think they'll check the manifests?" "The Vial will," she said. "They're the only ones paying attention. And when they do?" She stopped walking. Just for a moment, she looked back at the conclave complex at its towers, its carved stone, its 400 years of accumulated authority, with an expression that was not hatred and not satisfaction, and not quite either thing. "Then they'll understand what I said," she told him. She turned back toward the transit hub and kept walking. Somewhere in the conclave's legal registry filed quietly, 3 years prior, on a Tuesday, by a small law firm on Earth that specialized in obscure interstellar statutes, a petition sat in an automated queue, ticking. Sereth of the Seventh Fold did not sleep that night. This was not unusual for him. The Veil didn't sleep the way most species did. They rested in long, shallow intervals, their minds never fully going dark, always processing, always sorting. It was what made them good analysts. It was also what made them deeply unpleasant at social gatherings. He sat in his delegation's quarters with a screen in front of him, and 10 years of Earth shipping manifests, spreading out like something that had no clean edges. The junior delegate, whose name was Preeth, sat across from him and watched him work with the specific kind of patience that young people develop when they are trying to learn from someone who doesn't explain himself. "Talk me through what you're seeing," Preeth said. After an hour of silence, Sereth pointed at the screen. Earth filed 412 asteroid survey claims in the last decade. Routine. Scattered across uninhabited systems. No one looked twice because asteroid surveys are boring, and Earth was always filing things. They're a paperwork species. It's one of the things the Conclave found annoying about them. And 31 of those survey claims are in locations that make no geological sense for asteroid mining. Wrong stellar positions, wrong debris field compositions, no viable mineral yields. He pulled up a star map. But if you plot them as communication relay points, he connected the 31 dots. Preeth stared at the map. The dots formed a web. Clean lines. Redundant coverage. Not a survey grid. A network. "That's a relay infrastructure," Preeth said. "It's the spine of one," Sereth said. "Filed as survey markers. Registered under 6 different Earth corporate entities, each incorporated in a different jurisdiction, none of them obviously connected. I didn't find the connection until I cross-referenced the filing attorneys." He looked at Preeth. "Same firm. Every single one. A firm that also happens to specialize in interstellar sovereign law." Preeth leaned back. "When did they start?" "The first filing is 9 years ago, 4 months after the Conclave rejected Earth's trade equity petition for the 3rd time." Sereth paused. The 3rd time. Not the first time they were humiliated. Not the second. After the 3rd, something changed in their approach. They stopped pushing on the door. They started building around the walls. He pulled up a second layer of data. Pilot licensing records. Cross-referenced with Earth's civil aviation equivalent. Cross-referenced again with deep space navigation certifications filed through Conclave systems. 7 years ago, he said, Earth began a quiet expansion of its deep space pilot training program. The program's stated purpose was commercial shipping readiness. What it actually taught based on the curriculum modules, which are public record because Earth files everything, was gravitational drift navigation. The ability to chart a course through hyperspace without lane codes. Without conclave-issued lane codes, Preth said. Without any external codes at all. Self-derived. From scratch. Sareth set down the stylus he'd been holding. Do you know how long it took the Vael to develop independent hyperspace navigation? After we achieved our first faster-than-light transit? Preth thought about it. 200 years? 230. With help from the Dravathi, who gave us access to their baseline charts. He looked at his junior delegate. Earth did it in 6 years. From first principles. Alone. While simultaneously attending every conclave trade summit and filing every required diplomatic report and behaving every visible way like a species that still needed the system to survive. The room was quiet. Outside the window, the conclave city's night traffic moved in slow lanes overhead, freighters and diplomatic shuttles running conclave-registered transponders, paying conclave tolls, following conclave routes. They were performing dependence, Preth said. They were performing dependence, Sareth confirmed. Every concession they made at the trade table bought them another 6 months of not being looked at too closely. Every time a conclave delegate talked down to a human representative, and the human representative sat quietly and accepted it, that was time. Every humiliation was a transaction. They were paying in dignity and collecting in runway. He stood and walked to the window. There is a particular kind of intelligence, he said, that does not announce itself. It does not argue in the chamber. It does not write manifestos. It files paperwork. It incorporates shell entities. It trains pilots. It builds infrastructure in the dark, and it waits. And it is patient in a way that most species find indistinguishable from weakness, because most species have never had to be that patient. He watched a freighter run a toll relay, 200 meters above the street. Earth has been that patient for 9 years. While we watched the door, they built a second house. Preth pulled up the relay network map again. How active is it? That, Sareth said, is the part that keeps me awake. He pulled up a third data set, traffic analysis. Electromagnetic signal traces filed as background noise in routine deep space observation reports. The kind of reports that sat in databases unread because they were routine and boring and filed by a species that filed everything. He had read them. They were not background noise. The network has been active for 14 months, Sareth said. Fully operational. The signals are encrypted in a format we've never cataloged because it's not a conclave standard encryption. It's something they built themselves. But the traffic volume, he highlighted the numbers, is consistent with a functioning multi-system trade relay. Not test signals. Not calibration. Live traffic. Actual cargo coordination. Preth did the math in his head. 14 months of active operation. The banishment vote had been 3 months in planning. They were running the network before the vote, Preth said. Before they even knew for certain the banishment would happen. They knew, Sareth said. They filed that legal petition 3 years ago. They knew the vote was coming. They prepared for it the way you prepare for weather, not by trying to stop it, but by making sure when it arrives, you're already dry. He closed the screen. His eyes, all 4 of them, settled into the middle distance. We need to bring this to the Archon in the morning. He won't want to hear it. No, Sareth agreed. He will want very much not to hear it, which is exactly why we have to make sure he does. Preth looked at the dark relay map on the screen. 31 dots, each one filed as nothing, each one meaning everything. What do we tell him? Sareth picked up his stylus again, turned it over once in his fingers. We tell him that the ceremony today was not a punishment, he said. We tell him it was the moment they stopped needing to pretend. 6 months after the banishment, the Conclave's Economic Monitoring Division produced a report that no one wanted to sign their name to. The analyst who wrote it, a Keth named Vrasa, methodical and deeply uncomfortable with what her own numbers were telling her, submitted it without a cover memo, without summary conclusions, without any of the usual framing language that made bad news easier to receive. She simply attached the data and sent it upward through the system, and then went to lunch and tried not to think about it. The report said, in the flat language of economic metrics, that Earth was thriving, not surviving, not limping along on pre-banishment reserves, thriving. In the 6 months since being cut off from every registered trade route, every communication relay, every diplomatic channel the Conclave operated, Earth's economic output had grown by 34%. its shipping volume measured by the only metric still accessible to conclave observers, which was gravitational displacement tracking, had increased. Its cargo transit times had dropped. Earth was faster without the conclave than it had ever been with it. Vrasa came back from lunch and found 3 messages from senior officials asking if the numbers were correct. She replied to all 3 with the same 2 words. They are. The thing nobody in the conclave had fully accounted for, the thing that felt obvious in hindsight, the way things always do, was what the conclave's own system had actually cost Earth to be a part of. 40 years of membership fees, graduated by GDP equivalent, and consistently argued upward by species who sat on the fee-setting committee and happened to also be Earth's trade competitors. 30 years of route licensing costs a fee charged per registered hyperspace lane per fiscal cycle. The rate set by a subcommittee that Earth had never once held a seat on. 2 decades of inspection levies, applied to every Earth-flagged vessel at every conclave toll relay, at a rate that the conclave's own charter described as standardized, and which was, in practice, 40% higher for non-founding species. Add the diplomatic tribute schedules. Add the technology sharing assessments. Add the administrative compliance costs for the 417 separate regulatory frameworks that conclave membership required a species to maintain internal bureaucratic structures to satisfy. The number, run cleanly, came out to between 19 and 23% of Earth's total economic output every year. For decades, banishment had not cut Earth off, it had cut the weight off. The ships running on human-laid deep lanes paid no toll relays because the toll relays were conclave infrastructure, and Earth wasn't using conclave infrastructure anymore. The cargo coordination running through the 31 relay stations filed as asteroid surveys moved without inspection stops, without licensing checks, without the 48-hour hold periods that conclave compliance required at border transition points. The pilots trained on gravitational drift navigation flew routes that were, in several cases, measurably shorter than the registered conclave lanes, because the registered lanes had been drawn to route traffic through toll-heavy systems, and Earth's self-derived charts followed physics instead of economics. It was faster. It was cheaper. It was, in every measurable way, better. And then the Makari reached out. The Makari were a mid-tier species. 6 systems, modest fleet, good manufacturing base, no particular political ambitions. They had voted for Earth's banishment because they voted with the majority on most things. It was their political strategy, and it had kept them safe for 200 years. They were not cruel about it. They simply did not think of Earth often, and when they did, it was in the vague category of species that were more trouble than they were worth. 3 months after the banishment, a Makari trade envoy named Sathar sent an unofficial message to Earth's. There was no diplomatic channel, so he sent it to an Earth commercial shipping coordinator whose contact information appeared on a cargo manifest that had somehow landed in a Makari freight database. The message was brief. It asked, in careful and slightly awkward terms, whether Earth might be open to discussing direct shipping arrangements. Off-register, bilateral, no conclave middlemen. The response from Earth's side came within 4 hours. Yes. Terms attached. Review at your convenience. The terms were simple, clean. The fee structure was, compared to what the Makari paid through conclave routing, 40% cheaper. The transit time estimate was faster by a factor that Sathar read 3 times because he didn't believe it the first 2. The contract language was standard commercial interstellar, with no political clauses, no alignment requirements, no committee review periods. It looked, to Sathar, like a very good business arrangement. It was signed within a week. The Bressi followed. Then the Oluwan. Then, quietly and very carefully, the Vithani, who were a founding conclave species, and who signed their treaty through a commercial subsidiary, specifically to avoid the word treaty, appearing in any document that could be cross-referenced with their conclave membership obligations. 4 species, active bilateral agreements with a banished nation, running traffic on human infrastructure, paying human rates. The conclave's monitoring division flagged it. The report went upward. Senior officials read it, and then read it again, and then had meetings about it, and then had meetings about those meetings. The Archon was briefed on a Tuesday morning, in a session that was supposed to last 30 minutes and ran for 3 hours. The core problem, The problem that sat in the center of every conversation like a stone nobody wanted to pick up was that none of it was illegal. Earth was not a conclave member. Earth was not subject to conclave trade exclusivity rules. The Makari, the Bressi, the Olun, the Vithani, they were members, and their membership did include language about exclusive routing obligations. But that language had been written 40 years ago to prevent members from routing around conclave systems to older, pre-conclave networks. Networks that still existed. Networks that were grandfathered. The Earth network was not a pre-conclave grandfathered system, but it also wasn't classified as anything that the exclusivity clause actually covered. Earth's lawyers had found the gap. The Archon sent a message to Delegate Vasquez through the only channel still technically available, a commercial routing flag, the kind used for cargo disputes, asking for clarification on Earth's legal interpretation of the exclusivity clause. Her response arrived in 40 minutes. It read, "You'll want to check Article 7, subsection 14 of the Banishment Accords you wrote." We did. The Archon read the message twice. Then he called his chief legal counsel. Then he watched the color leave his chief legal counsel's face in a way that, in 30 years of politics, he had never seen before. "What's in Article 7, subsection 14? He asked. His chief legal counsel pulled up the Banishment Accords, a document so rarely used that its digital copy had to be retrieved from an archive system that took 4 minutes to respond. The Archon read it. He sat with it for a long time. Outside his window, somewhere in the transit lanes above the city, a freighter ran a route it hadn't paid to use. He didn't yet know whose infrastructure it was running on. He was about to find out. Article 7, subsection 14 of the Galactic Conclave's Banishment Accords was written 211 years ago by a committee of 3 Dreth legal scholars who had never, in their collective experience, encountered a species that would read it as anything other than a formality. It read, "A banished species, upon demonstrating independent infrastructure capability sufficient to support multi-system commerce, and upon receiving bilateral treaty recognition from no fewer than 4 sovereign member states of the conclave, may petition this body for designation as an autonomous sovereign entity. An autonomous sovereign entity shall hold all rights and protections afforded to full member states without membership obligations, dues assessments, regulatory compliance requirements, or route exclusivity constraints." The committee had included it as a release valve, a theoretical off-ramp for cases where a banished species eventually developed enough to be worth readmitting, a way to bring them back in without the political difficulty of reversing a banishment vote. It was meant for species that spent 200 or 300 years in isolation, and then, humbled and cooperative, asked to return. It was not meant for a species that filed the petition the same afternoon they were banished. The Archon's chief legal counsel, a Dreth named Vial who had been practicing conclave law for 60 years, looked at the petition timestamp for a long time. "They filed at 1422, she said. "The banishment session concluded at 1419. 3 minutes, the Archon said. "They filed in 3 minutes. They prepared it beforehand. They prepared it beforehand." Vale set the document down on the table between them. "The petition is compliant. The infrastructure claim is supported by 14 registered relay stations. They decloaked them from the asteroid survey designation 6 days ago, which is the first business day following the petition's automatic review window expiration. The bilateral treaties are valid. 4 member states, all properly executed, all technically within their rights under the exclusivity clause gap She paused. "Under the gap. That we missed," the Archon said. Bael did not argue. The Archon's legal review session had been scheduled for 2 hours. It ran for 11. They brought in 5 additional jurists, the conclave's top practitioners of sovereign and interstellar law. They went through the petition line by line, clause by clause, looking for the flaw, the error, the overreach, the procedural misstep that would give them grounds to deny. They found nothing. The petition was clean. It was, in the careful and slightly dry assessment of the senior jurist brought in from the conclave's independent review body, the most precisely constructed legal document submitted to this body in the last 40 years. Every requirement in subsection 14 was met with documentation so thorough that challenging any individual element would require disproving evidence that Earth had been building for the better part of a decade. 3 of the 5 jurists asked to review the filing attorney's credentials. All 3 came back with the same answer. A small firm on Earth, 11 lawyers, founded 17 years ago, specializing exclusively in obscure interstellar sovereign law. The firm had filed hundreds of routine documents with the conclave over the years: survey registrations, commercial cargo flags, compliance reports, background noise, the kind of filing that sits in an automated queue and gets processed by a system that doesn't read, only sorts. Including the petition itself, which had been sitting in the automated queue for 3 years, processed and acknowledged, and then filed into a subfolder that the Archon's office was legally required to act on within 90 days of the documented conditions being met. The 90-day clock had started the morning after the banishment vote, when the 4 bilateral treaties were formally registered. "We have 63 days left on the response window," Vale said. "And if we deny it? On what grounds?" She looked at him across the table. "The petition is compliant. If we deny a compliant petition, we are in violation of our own foundational charter. The Vithani alone could bring a constitutional challenge that would consume this body for the next 20 years. The Bressi and the Oluun have already quietly indicated through back channels that they would co-sign such a challenge." She paused. "We don't have the votes to survive that, Archon." "We don't have the votes," he repeated. He said it the way a person says something when they are hearing it for the first time, even though it has been true for a while. The chamber outside the legal review room was quiet. It was late. Most of the conclave complex had emptied out into the city's night corridors. Through the long windows, the transit lanes were sparse, a few freighters running their registered routes in slow, lit arcs across the dark. "How many species are in active negotiation with Earth right now?" the Archon asked. Vale consulted the monitoring report on her screen. 7 confirmed. 3 more preliminary. She hesitated. Sereth of the 7th Fold submitted an analysis this afternoon. He believes the number will be 14 within the next fiscal cycle. Possibly more. 14. His projection model has a strong track record. The Archon was quiet for a moment. He was thinking about the way Vasquez had walked out of the chamber, the folder under her arm, the even pace of her footsteps, the 60 seconds she had spent not arguing, not begging, not even performing defiance, just reporting a fact. "The clock started 3 years ago." "She knew," he said. "It was not a question. She knew before we called the vote," Vale said. "The petition was filed on the assumption that the vote would happen. They didn't know for certain, but they prepared as if they did. Which means they understood us well enough to know it was coming regardless of what they said or did. So they stopped trying to prevent it and started using it. Using it as the trigger event. The moment the banishment took effect, the exclusivity clauses stopped applying to Earth. The moment the exclusivity clauses stopped applying, the bilateral treaties became legally clean. The moment the treaties were clean, the petition conditions were met." She looked at him. "They designed a sequence, and they waited for us to start it." Outside, a freighter crossed the window's frame and disappeared into the dark. The Archon looked at the petition on the table. 11 lawyers in a small office on Earth, filing boring paperwork for 17 years. Survey claims, cargo flags, compliance reports, 1 petition. 3 years in a queue. He thought about the conclave's founding documents, the pride of them, the weight of 400 years of accumulated authority. He thought about the 81 species that had voted in his chamber, the galleries full of delegates, the ceremony of it. And then he thought about Mara Vasquez in a budget hotel 2 kilometers from the complex, pressing her gray suit, going over relay station numbers with a young aide. "Schedule a full session," he said. "We ratify the petition." Vale nodded. She had known that was where this was going. She had known since she saw the document. "And the public statement?" she asked. He looked at the window, at the transit lanes, at the freighters running routes that were no longer, it turned out, entirely his to control. "Tell them we are honoring our foundational commitment to sovereign rights under interstellar law." He stood. "Don't editorialize." She didn't ask what he meant. She was a good lawyer. She understood the difference between what a statement said and what it meant. What it meant was, we had no choice. But they would not be saying that part out loud. The ratification session lasted 4 hours and was, by the standards of the Galactic Conclave, remarkably quiet. There was no real debate. The jurists had done their work. The charter language was clear. Several delegations gave brief statements, the kind of statements that filled time without saying anything, the political equivalent of a held breath. The Keth ambassador, who had made the sound of amusement in the chamber 3 years ago, made a different sound now. It translated roughly as someone who had bet on the wrong outcome and was being dignified about it. When the vote came, it was 61 in favor, 12 against, 8 abstentions. Earth's autonomous sovereign status was ratified. Delegate Mara Vasquez was not in the chamber. She had not been invited, banished species did not attend conclave sessions, and Earth had not rejoined. The decision was transmitted to her office through a commercial routing flag, the same channel the Archon had used to reach her 3 weeks prior. She was on the observation deck of Station Meridian 7 when Torres brought her the notification. Meridian 7 was the largest of Earth's 14 relay stations. It had been built over 6 years by a construction crew that filed its work permits as deep space maintenance operations. It had been active for 14 months. It was, as of the ratification, flying Earth's flag openly, a flag that now, for the first time in Earth's history, represented a recognized sovereign entity operating outside the rules of any larger body. The observation deck was a long, curved corridor with a clear composite wall that looked out into the void. Vasquez stood at the wall with a cup of tea that had gone cold while she read through the relay traffic reports. She did that most mornings. Not because she had to, she had a staff for that, but because she liked to know the actual numbers, the real ones, not summaries. Torres handed her the notification screen without a word. She read it, set the screen on the ledge beside her cold tea, looked back out at the dark. Below the station below, in the sense that Meridian 7's orientation placed it as below, which was arbitrary and meaningless, but felt right a freighter from the Macquarie, ran a human-laid lane without a conclave transponder active. Its drive signature was clean, and its cargo seal was Earth-certified, and it was running a route that was 9% shorter and 40% cheaper than the nearest equivalent registered conclave path. The Macquarie had 17 more scheduled for this week. The Bressie had 32. 3 more species, the Saloon, the Heveth, and a small but strategically positioned species called the Marath, whose home system sat at a critical junction point in the northern freight corridor, were in the final stages of bilateral negotiations. Their lawyers had been in contact with Earth's small 11-person firm for the past month. Torres stood beside her and looked at the same dark and said nothing for a while. "You should feel something," he said eventually. "This is what we've been working toward for 9 years. I feel tired," she said. "That's not. It's the right thing to feel." She picked up the cold tea, looked at it, set it back down. When something takes 9 years, the feeling is tired. That's what 9 years does to you. The other feeling comes later. Torres nodded. He had learned to trust her on questions like this. 2 days after the ratification, the conclave sent a formal delegation to Meridian 7. Not through the commercial routing flag. Through an official diplomatic channel Earth's sovereign status now entitled it to 1. The message was carefully worded, full of the formal language that the conclave used when it wanted to approach something carefully. It expressed interest in what it called normalization discussions, opportunities for bilateral cooperation, mutual benefit. What it wanted was what the Archon could not put in writing, a way back into an economic network he no longer controlled. Vasquez scheduled the meeting for a Tuesday. She used the station's formal reception room, which her staff had furnished simply a table, chairs, a window that looked out at the relay network's traffic. On a clear day, which in space meant when the sensors were calibrated correctly, you could see the drive signatures of 6 ships running human lanes at any given moment. She made tea. This detail caused a quiet crisis in the protocol division of the conclave's diplomatic staff, who spent 48 hours debating whether accepting tea from a sovereign entity constituted an implicit acknowledgement of that entity's cultural precedents. They ultimately decided it did not. 3 of the vile delegation's junior members, who had been assigned to observe the meeting, disagreed with this conclusion, but kept the disagreement to themselves. The Archon did not come personally. He sent his deputy Archon, a Dreth named Orveth, who was younger than his superior, and considerably better at hiding what he was thinking. Orveth sat across from Vasquez and went through the correct formalities and then, when the formalities were done, looked at her with the directness that the conclave's senior leadership had apparently decided was the right approach this time. Earth's network, he said. It's expansion. We'd like to discuss a framework for integration. What kind of integration? She asked. Mutual access. Standardized routing cooperation. Perhaps a joint infrastructure committee. Vasquez held her tea. A joint committee that sets terms? Terms that reflect the interests of all parties. Earth's terms currently reflect Earth's interests, she said. That's why 14 species are in active negotiations with us, and not with you. Orvith absorbed that. He was good at absorbing things. We're not asking for control, he said. We're asking for partnership. I know what you're asking for, she said. It wasn't unkind. It was simply true. You want access to the network at rates that are better than what your own system offers. You want your member species to have those rates too, so they stop having reasons to negotiate around you. You want to be part of something that works. Orvith was quiet. We can discuss it, Vasquez said. Through our trade office. Standard bilateral terms. You'll fill out the same forms the Makari filled out. Your legal team will review the same contract the Bressi signed. She set down her tea. There's no special arrangement for old members. There are no old members here. There's just trade. That's it? Orvith said. No concessions? No historical recognition? No. Standard bilateral terms, she said. Same as everyone else. Outside the window, a Bressi freighter ran a human-laid lane in a clean, unhurried arc across the dark. Orvith watched it for a moment. Vasquez did not watch it. She had seen it enough times that she no longer needed to. He understood then what Sereth had been trying to explain to the Archon for 3 years. It was not that humanity had outmaneuvered the Conclave. Outmaneuvering implied a contest, a confrontation, two forces pushing against each other until one gave way. That was not what had happened. What had happened was that humanity had simply built something real while everyone was watching the argument. They had been patient with the patience of people who understood that the argument was never the point. The argument was what you did while the infrastructure dried. Orvith picked up the tea. He didn't know what else to do with his hands. It was, against his expectations, very good. He thought about what the forms would look like. The same forms the Makari had filled out. A species that had sat in the Conclave's galleries for 200 years, reduced to the same stack of paperwork as a species that had been banished 6 months ago. He thought about whether that was humiliating. Then he thought about the freighter running the clean, fast lane outside the window. He drank the tea and asked for the forms. Vasquez handed them across the table without ceremony. No triumph in it, no gloating, just the forms, just the next thing. 9 years of work, and this was how it ended. Not with a speech, not with a moment, but with paperwork crossing a table on a Tuesday morning, while the galaxy's most powerful political body filled out the same documents as everyone else. Torres, standing by the door, thought he saw something in her expression. Not satisfaction exactly. The other feeling. The one that comes later. It looked a lot like rest.